Okay, so today's deeper dive is to discuss eating disorders and geez, how we can prevent them. By now, you've been reading about eating disorders and you've begun discussing them. You understand how dangerous they can be. And truly, with the obesity epidemic we have in the West, and well, actually, now it's even getting to be a problem in the East. It's like a worldwide problem. There are a few things we could do better. And so let's start about, how we're raising our children, right? And so if we could establish healthier relationships with food when they're young, that would help. Um, Not necessarily dividing food into like good and bad categories, right? You don't want to make some foods like literally forbidden fruit because we know then you crave them and you feel deprived when you don't have those foods. So, ideally, with children, we're exposing them to a wide variety of foods. Their palates are developing, their tastes are developing. Sometimes it takes 5 or 6 times for a child to try a new food before they accept it. So, in our house with my son, it was always try it. Maybe this time you'll like it. After 5 or 6 times, if he didn't like it, we wouldn't keep forcing it. Maybe a year later, we would try to introduce the food. But the idea was to truly, the idea of eating the rainbow, trying to have as much color on your plate, ideally half the plate being fruits and veggies, the other half divided between protein and grain. That's sort of the more modern food pyramid or recommendations for a healthy diet. And so that's what we want to encourage our children is to eat healthy and love healthy. If you get off processed foods, and especially like processed flour and sugar, you can taste foods better. And so sometimes I think children, they have so many packaged processed foods that's part of why they reject fruits and vegetables and sort of clean eating. So those would be my tips is to try to start early exposing children to all kinds of wonderful foods and to enjoy eating. It doesn't mean that they have to fear food. Um, but to really learn that food can be enjoyable and at the same time not using it as a reward. That's how we get stuck in emotional eating cycles, right? Where we constantly are either soothing our feelings when we're upset with food or celebrating with food. I don't have as much a problem with celebrating with food as long as it's not about the food, and that's just part of the celebration. Those are all much healthier relationships with food. Really discouraging any type of diet or food restriction. Healthy eating and wanting to eat healthier, and a lot of times teenagers or even children, when they're learning about healthy food choices, want to make changes. But I really would discourage any type of dieting or food restriction, as you see in my second point there. Teens who start dieting are much more likely, one, to develop an eating disorder. I never met a client with an eating disorder where it didn't start out with a diet. Now, that doesn't mean everyone who diets develops an eating disorder, obviously, but almost exclusively all eating disorders started with a diet. So it's a slippery slope, especially if you have other risk factors. If you're very body conscious or you have a distorted body image or you have eating disorders in your family or you're perfectionistic or you get the idea. Can be a very slippery slope. I saw in the discussion this week somebody talking about how often you get praise when you first start losing weight, and that can be very reinforcing for certain people. And then they can get, to the point where their eating gets very disordered. As you see, food restriction makes binging more likely. We obviously are hungrier when we're restricting, and we feel deprived. And then often if we eat what we think we shouldn't be eating, we will overeat or binge because we have felt so deprived. Try not talking about kids' weight and appearance. I try not to do this ever. And it can be challenging, particularly with what's expected in our culture, right? Where we often, especially with little girls or young women, that we are, even old women like me, that you're almost expected to comment on appearance, especially if somebody's wearing something new. But it really, again, I feel like it's a very slippery slope. Then people are trying to, will start associating their value, especially children, with their appearance. But you'd be surprised how often we make these comments. Just try to notice in the next week. And children will actually, bid for these comments. They get so used to them. When I don't, obviously we censor to a degree what's appropriate for our children, but they're going to come across, unhealthy images of people and stories and in the media, and just use those as teaching moments, and talk about, weight and appearance and, what their friends talk about. And especially again, among girls, this is often a topic of conversation. And so just having these frank conversations with our children early and keeping communication open, and products and media that really perpetuate ridiculous standards, like a lot of like fashion magazines and things like that, just not supporting them, not purchasing them, not having them around. We call it stimulus control. And well, about that because we covered self-control. Actually, no, that was my other course, but we call it stimulus control in psychology. So, why support this industry that has promotes such ridiculous standards that even the models themselves can't adhere to, and they have to be photoshopped. So, and then of course, you model healthy eating yourself, model healthy body image. I can't tell you how many clients with eating disorders have a parent or a sibling or somebody who also either has an eating disorder or some very distorted body image, or constantly talks about their body in negative ways, and body shaming, and constantly talking about food, and all messages that can be problematic for young children and teenagers. So, and if you have your own issues, go get help. Really, I mean, go get help. There's help available. You've read all about it. You're reading about it this week. We have some wonderful treatments for not just eating disorders, but poor relationships with food or body image issues. I always say, and I take this from a song in the 70s, but your body is maybe the 80s. Your body is the most incredible instrument you'll ever own. So whatever shape or size or it's incredible, and start appreciating that. And then, we're not going to stop finding people beautiful, men, women, our pets, where, we find beauty everywhere. So it's not, even though beauty can be an objectifying thing, it doesn't have to be. And particularly if we start really expanding our definition of what's beautiful, the ways I just talked about with regard to your own body. So those are just few thoughts on prevention, maybe, ones that you don't typically hear or ones that weren't in your book that I wanted to mention. And I hope you have a good week.